people who have a lot of body fat, a lot of extra body fat, they would see that they are desiring to induce lipolysis because they're trying to get the fat out of their body. So they want to break down the fat. But of course, as they break down the fat, it's then going to make this shift to fat being utilized as energy, which is less ideal, as you say. We can maybe talk about why it's less ideal. It's contributing to insulin resistance, as you just said. So the question I had that I got was, what's the solution to that then? If I'm trying to lose fat and yet lipolysis makes everything worse, it slows down my metabolism, it reduces my energy. How do I do it? Is liposuction the only, answer? Actually hoovering it out with some kind of device, or how do I get this fat out of my body?
Yeah, luckily that's not the only solution. So when it comes to just looking at the adipose tissue, just looking at our fat stores, how do we reduce them? There's two sides to that equation. There's the fat being released from the fat stores, and then the fat entering the fat stores, or even carbohydrates entering the fat stores and being converted to fat. But that's disfavored compared to just converting fat straight to fat, because that's much more efficient. So we need to consider both of those sides. And just because we're increasing the fat release side doesn't mean that we're increasing the net fat release, because we often have more fat coming in as well. It's a circular system. And so there's a couple different things that we can think of that support this. Firstly is when we're overweight, we already have higher baseline levels of lipolysis. When we have extra adipose tissue, we're already increasing the fat release. We can have the same level of whatever stress hormone, glucagon, adrenaline, cortisol, the same level of the hormones that drive lipolysis, and yet we'll have increased levels of lipolysis as a result because we have much more fat to release, and we'll see higher levels of free fatty acids at baseline. In fact, higher levels of free fatty acids is associated with metabolic syndrome significantly and increases as it gets worse. So if it was as simple as just release more fat to lose the fat, then the worse degeneration you had, the worse insulin resistance you had, the more fat you would lose. And we definitely don't see that happening. So that's one line of evidence. Another one that I would suggest is a lot of people use that as a suggestion to use something like a low-carb diet where you have a lot more lipolysis. But what ends up happening when we go to a low-carb diet is we just shift the fuel transport systems from glucose-based to fat-based. So we see a lot more lipids in the blood. We see a lot more free fatty acid release. We see a lot more LDL typically, which is basically transport, especially the VLDL, which is a transport of triglycerides. And then we see increased LDL as a result of that. And that's just a representation of a shift in fuel usage, because at the same time, you have much more triglyceride uptake and much more free fatty acid uptake at the adipose tissue and at the liver. So in the same way that when you're using more glucose, you're running through your glycogen stores faster and replenishing them faster. It's like this is our main fuel. The same thing happens with fat. It doesn't actually mean that we're losing fat. And there are a number of studies, metabolic ward studies, where they put people on a low-carb diet and they have lower levels of insulin, much higher levels of lipolysis, much higher levels of fatty acid oxidation, but they don't lose more body fat. And that's just because there's more fats being taken back up by the fat stores too. So we want to not get caught up in this idea that fat burning and fat release is the pure solution. We have to consider the other side of the equation. And then it gets a lot more complicated where we're talking about things like stress hormones that increase the deposition of free fatty acids or any fuel into the fat stores and impair our ability to utilize the fuel that's coming into the bloodstream. And that's really where we want to focus. If we're not effectively converting the fuel that's coming in into energy, it has to be stored, right? That is the other option. And then we end up storing it as body fat. If we fix that capacity for energy production, then we don't have to worry about it being stored as body fat because the fuel is actually being used and we have enough energy, which helps to then turn off our hunger so we're not overeating, so to speak, or excessively hungry. And then we don't also have the storage of fat. And so just to real succinctly answer the question, come back to the beginning, even if we're on a very high carb diet, we're still going to have some lipolysis. This is not a 100 and 0. It's not a black and white situation. At baseline, we have a decent amount of lipolysis, and it's even higher if you have more body fat stores. It is more than enough. If you are still utilizing those fats more than substrate is being stored in the fat stores, you'll be okay. And when we're eating a higher carb diet, we're still burning fat as well. Again, we're not talking black and white. We're not talking 100 and 0. So we're always going to be using some fatty acids. Our heart really likes to use fatty acids. Our muscles like to use fatty acids at rest. That's going to happen even if we're on a pretty high carb diet. And that's good. Those are especially if we think about the muscles have very low energy demands. And because of that, at rest, using fatty acids is perfect. There's no issue with that. And that can happen while we're still eating lots of carbs and not forcing tons of lipolysis and forcing areas that don't want to be running on fat to run on fat.
If you enjoyed that clip, you'll definitely want to download the free Energy Balance Food Guide. The Energy Balance Food Guide will help you determine exactly what to eat to optimally support your metabolism and help you lose weight, improve your digestion, get amazing sleep, boost your energy, and so much more. The food guide makes it extremely easy to get started with a bioenergetic approach to optimizing your health. So head over to jfeldmanwellness.com/guide to download your free Energy Balance Food Guide.